Hi, everyone. Welcome to the WWCode podcast. We're so fortunate and excited to have Caroline Sherman here today, Tableau's VP of Product Management at Salesforce. And we're discussing all about generative AI and how analysts are employing the powerful revolutionary tools they're developing in their workflows today. I am Lindsey Robertson. I am the WWCode Leadership Fellow for the Data Science track, and I'm very fortunate to be asking my questions and diving into Caroline's mind and her background today. And we're thrilled to have you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Lindsey. It's great to be here.
So I want to just kind of get us kicked off with a few questions about your career journey and how you started as an analyst for the U.S. Treasury and kind of worked your way into product management. Can you talk about your journey a little bit with us?
Yeah, sure. And I'm laughing because it is a journey. And I often joke that I'm a bit of a career mutt. So I'll rewind a little bit, which is to say in school, I was studying Chinese. I almost went to conservatory for music instead of college. And I ended up studying math. So you can sort of hear I had a lot of interest. I really had no idea where I was going to end up. And my first job out of college was actually on Wall Street. I was doing quantitative investing at Goldman. And I ended up there just before the financial crisis. So it was an interesting time, to say the least. I was there for almost 4 years, which was kind of an eternity at that time and place. It's not like quite a bit of change in that time. And I felt really lucky to be in that spot. And that's kind of what led me to the US Treasury, is I felt like, well, hey, how can I take advantage of these skills and these experiences and put them to some good use? And I had the opportunity to go to Treasury and work on post-crisis regulation. And in particular, I was working on identifying threats to national financial stability. And so that was sort of analyzing everything from how things might change in China to interest rate shocks and things we're actually experiencing recently, and cybersecurity. I mean, it ran the gamut. And what was interesting about that experience and starts to sort of, I think paint a clearer picture about how I ended up where I am now, is I needed to do all that analysis. And then I needed to share it with people in Congress who are not sort of hired to their job, so to speak, because they're experts in the economy or finance. And so I needed to convey it in a way that made sense to really anyone. And that was a job I really enjoyed. That was a combination of things I really enjoyed. But when I left there, I actually went to business school, and I honestly did not really know what the path was for me. And I just talked to anyone who would listen or anyone who would be willing to talk. And I kind of just tried to hear where were the opportunities to do some of the things I liked doing. And through all those conversations, I was encouraged to try product management in tech. And when I did, I started at a business intelligence company for sales teams. It was actually built on Salesforce data, so my life came full circle. And when I went, it really fit like a glove. The role was just right for me. And I got to do really 3 types of things that worked for me. I got to be my sort of math nerd self. I got to talk to people and understand what they needed in changing times. And I got to be creative. And that was the part that I kind of introduced in product management. So that's kind of how I ended up in product management from US Treasury, which sounds like so unrelated on the surface.
Well, when you hear your journey, it definitely makes sense. And I find that the best product managers are really rooted in the technical to begin with. You know, it really helps to marry that business knowledge and the technical knowledge. I think that it creates wonderful opportunities in product.
Well, it's fun. I totally agree. It's a fun combination for me. And I think it does sort of meld these different parts of your brain. And you heard I did music early on. And that, so like, I remember saying once that when I was a little kid and someone asked me what I wanted to be, I said an inventor. And I sort of feel like this is as close as I could realistically get. And so I feel very lucky to end up in this profession.
Oh, absolutely. That is so intriguing to hear. You know, I'm just curious too, you know, through your experience as an analyst and then shifting into product, how technical did you have to get? Was this, you know, just for our listeners' sake, was this something that you spent, you know, years coding and learning how to do things like that? Or is it really just shaping your skills, softer skills, and your leadership skills? What kind of helped you lean into your product management career better?
Very good question. And it was a little bit of both is maybe what I would say. But I think that the skill that actually was most important for me, I learned this from listening to a talk in my first year out of school, was the skill of mastery. I heard this thing that said, don't worry about the first job you take out of school. Don't worry about what the thing is. Just worry about learning how to master it. And what I would say is, for me, mastering things, learning to do whatever I was doing really well right in front of me, was what then opened new doors or new opportunities for me, and that I could go kind of tackle and then master those. And so the reason I say that is because if you're doing something interesting and well and you're liking it, dive into it. Don't worry about saying, well, I have to on the side take coding classes or something because I need to fill in that gap. Or by mastering things, you'll develop a sort of a plethora of skills that turn out to be really useful. So that's actually kind of the way I look at it, which is maybe a little odd, but has worked for me, and I think is something that a lot of people would benefit from.
I think that's super powerful. It's something I actually haven't heard before, and I think it really helps narrow the focus for people. There's so much direction and information these days, and what young people and new career perspectives people are looking at, and it's hard for them to decide. And I think that's really helpful. So thank you for sharing that. So I wanted to kind of dive into some of the work Salesforce is doing, if you don't mind. And we're really excited about all the wonderful products that have come out this year, particularly Tableau GPT, some of the things that are going on with Tableau Pulse, and even the Einstein Discovery solutions. Mainly because analysts are about to get supercharged, and if they haven't already, there's a lot of potential and possibility there. As a budding analyst, and we'll kind of start from the beginning of the spectrum, what do you think is important now for analysts to start thinking about to not only prepare themselves to use these tools, the traditional studies, they need to look into statistics and analytics, but given that we are significantly aided by these tools these days, is there a recommendation you have for how to prepare yourself to get into the field of analytics, knowing that we have these new tools?
I have many. You are, Lindsey, you're sort of like hitting a passion of mine, unsurprisingly. And supercharged, use the word supercharged, and that really resonates with me. So I think what that means is it's going to be increasingly powerful and exciting to be a data analyst. And there are a couple of reasons for that. And this is sort of going to drive what I think matters for sort of getting into the field now. One is that, and I was with a large insurance company a couple of weeks ago that was talking about this exact thing that they're focused on in their own analytics team, which is you're going to get to spend less and less time on governance, on data cleaning, on a lot of the sort of nitty gritty work that has in many ways been the differentiating work with data, because if you don't do that, you can't use data today. But because there are going to be more and more tools that help you get that work done, it's going to shrink the amount of time you have to spend on that. And it's going to open up your time to do what really becomes the value creating analysis for the businesses that you work in, that before you only had a small amount of time to do. And that leads to kind of a second thing, which is one thing we know is that in most organizations, only 30% of people are really looking at or using data day to day. We also know that pretty much 100% of people would make better decisions, faster decisions, take action in a different way if they were using data. And so that leaves us with a huge number of people that we can now serve with data that we might not have been able to before because of some of the new tooling. So what that means, and now we can talk more about what that means specifically, what that means for the people getting into analytics today is really thinking about how your work connects to the business and thinking about what drives the business and how the analytics can actually influence that. That's going to become an increasingly important skill in and of itself. So I think that's kind of the connecting of dots that not that many people do today in a really excellent way, and is going to become really, I think, the driving opportunity for data analysts.
Oh, wow, that's super exciting and powerful. And you brought up a great point about the statistic about how many people are actually using data in their decision making and their day to day, and the fact that this window is opening now. The barriers to understanding data and being data driven are getting smaller and smaller by the day. And it's exciting to think about the different fields and different roles in business or in other organizations that can start becoming analysts in their own right. And I've always said that this is the type of field, either data science or analytics, that no matter what profession or focus that you have in your career, it can just make you better at that. So I'd love to hear more about the different roles that are starting to become data driven and start using data decision making in their day to day that aren't traditional analytic roles.
Well, let's see. So there's so many directions I could go with that question. Where do I start? Because what immediately springs to mind is that a marketing manager can use data now. A marketer, a line marketer can think about data. Salespeople can start to think about data in a way they didn't before to drive what their next best action would be. You know, customer service reps, managers of customer, all these functions that go through their days having to many times intuit what the right thing to do is, can now sort of introduce data into their work. And if you'll let me sort of be a little over the top about the stuff that I've been working on, the big product we launched this year that's been a labor of love for me is Tableau Pulse. And one of the core tenets of it is putting the metrics and insights that matter to you in your flow of work. And that's the big game changer that we're not always talking about. It's showing up at the right time and in the right place for those people. So that's why I'm talking about all these sort of jobs that you don't think of as data analysts, or you don't think of as sort of data-centric jobs, can now be informed by data. And I'll just say one more thing about this.
Sure.
I've often thought for a lot of these roles in organizations, I think this, I'm curious if this is what you're getting at, Lindsey.
Yeah.
Data has always kind of been seen as like a little bit of a frosting on the cake. And I think now it's an essential ingredient to the cake.
Absolutely.
It's no longer an extra or a sweetener. It's the like salt that without it, the whole thing stinks, you know? And I think that's this shift that we're seeing. And that's why when you ask me, like, what are the roles? I'm basically thinking everyone, how do I list every role? That's where I'm at.
Well, that's amazing. The potentials are limitless, honestly. And I really agree with you. And the work that Tableau has been doing in this space is just revolutionary, really. Yeah, and that kind of brings me more to the more seasoned analysts that have been doing this job. You know, you mentioned putting the workflows in your face, you know. So for the people that are in analytics currently and they're looking to leverage these tools, you know, the more experienced folks, what kinds of workflows, you know, do you think that will be enhanced? And what are some examples, you know, of what they're using in a Pulse use case, you know, to supercharge those workflows like we were talking about?
Yeah, so I think there's two things that come to mind immediately. The first thing is just in terms of their impact on the organization. The fact that they'll go from all their work will be exposed to 70% of the organization that just doesn't see it today. I mean, that's a huge change. It makes the role of being a data analyst, it was already incredibly powerful. I mean, when we talk about, just to take a step back, when we talk about 30% of an organization and that being the average looking at data, that adds up to millions of people, right? This is a huge number of people using data already. So it's already been incredibly powerful and differentiating to be a data analyst and bring that work to bear for the organization. But the idea that you can now double that, I mean, that's an unbelievable shift. So in terms of just thinking about the role in the company, that's the starting point, I think, for the mentality. And then more precisely in terms of using Tableau Pulse. So again, I'm so funny. I think a lot about how data helps us avoid bias. I mean, I could not be more biased on this topic.
We all tend to do that, but it's a good product to be biased about. Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We have gotten like a great response to it. So I think it's feeling very, very powerful so far. But the thing that we'll see, or what we are hoping to see happen, is that data analysts will now be able to translate the KPIs or the outcomes or the results that matter most to businesses into the metrics that you'll want to see show up in the flow of work for various parts of the business. So that will vary by team, but they'll be really creating this repository, which is kind of the single source of truth on what results matter to each team and each individual in the business. And by doing that, they'll create this whole ecosystem where we can generate insights on that information and then serve them to people, not only in their flow of work, but in natural language. So, you know, I mentioned my US Treasury experience before. Well, I gave people a lot of charts and they were useful and they're very valuable and very powerful. But what ended up being really influential to them absorbing it, if that wasn't kind of a natural way for them to interact with data, was putting it also just in plain language. And we're going to be able to serve people both at the same time with these metrics. And that's the sort of Tableau Pulse experience. It's this idea of keep the pulse of your business right in front of you without a lot of work and digging. And that's what the data analyst is going to be able to do going forward.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense. And it filled an incredible gap that we used to have in the field where learning data storytelling was really difficult, you know, sometimes for a quantitative background. Learning to translate that to stakeholders and create the compelling story or the needs, you know, out of the insights. So I guess, is there a way, and I think you kind of hit on this already, but that it's, streamlining the data storytelling. Do you have an example of how that could be used?
Yes, I do. I have so many pick. That's gonna
It's an important part. Yeah.
it is. And let me just say the data storytelling comment that you make, I do think a lot of people could spend a lot of time doing that. And the challenge is being a data analyst is already a hard job. It's already a busy job. It's not exactly like people are sitting around twiddling their thumbs, looking to add on a whole bunch of sort of translation, if you will, from the analysis that they unearth to those sort of end consumers, those business people. So look, it could be anything from a grocery store chain, making sure that their store managers know how inventory is shifting and what they need to do differently to stock appropriately. Like that's a really tangible output that you get from having that information right in your flow of work at the right time and knowing what's going on and how it all connects. Another example is, if you think about a call center, customer service is so essential for so many businesses who are doing, who are providing a service or a product. And it turns out that the calls to call centers fluctuate enormously, or tickets, whatever, whether someone emails, chats, or calls, those things fluctuate enormously. And you'll be able to know, okay, today it turns out this one region is really overloaded, but another region isn't. And I could actually redirect some of those today. Without that information, it's really hard to just guess at what's going on and where it's happening and why it's happening, what's driving what's happening. And so it's really going to be, what I often say is the information that you want to take action on is often just out of reach. And the idea is this brings it well within reach, accessible, because again, it's just in plain language with visualizations, but it starts with plain language. So you don't have to think all that hard about what you're interpreting. That data storytelling, as you say, is done for you. And so those are some of the examples of places where you'll see this show up.
So moving forward, I'd like to think about some of the ways that the in-context help for the analysts really allows them to think of their solutioning and their problem solving in a different way. Some things I've looked into and I was thinking about are suggestions on questions to ask. Are there any insights you can speak to about that, how it's been working out for the analysts using the tool?
Yeah. So we're very early sort of pre-pilot folks right now. And it's been really exciting already to see the reactions we're getting. And exactly as you say, one of the really powerful things, we're working on an assistant as well, and that's going to help data analysts as well. And the idea is to lower the bar on how hard it is to think of what's your next question, basically. And so that the exploring and figuring out kind of the next analysis doesn't become sort of a labor, but it becomes really just like a thought exercise around like, what do you think is interesting and valuable to the business? And specifically when it comes to building metrics for Tableau Pulse, that's where what we're seeing is we can provide questions that you can ask that produce new insights once we know the metrics that matter to the business. And so there's this really symbiotic relationship we now have with the data analyst around producing more and more valuable insights for the business.
That's super exciting. Thank you for sharing that. And I'd like to kind of go back to, you mentioned a couple of times your passion, and this is evident that you are super excited about the work you do because the products that your teams are putting out are fantastic. And that just kind of shows, that there's a lot of passion there. Can you remember back to the first time it kind of clicked, to that aha moment where you were in your career and you start thinking about the types of products you'd love to develop as that inventor, as a child inventor in you? Can you think about that moment and share it with our listeners?
I can. It's actually funny. A very specific moment pops to mind when you ask that. So I was just a few months out of college when the financial crisis hit. And one nice thing for me about that moment was I was fresh eyes. There were all these people who'd spent decades investing in a certain way with a whole bunch of assumptions, and the details don't really matter, but there are things around like what is the risk-free rate, as we call it? What sort of like money, what do you get from just holding money? And those are all essential ingredients to how you think about investing. And suddenly all of our assumptions were just turned on their heads. And it was a fascinating moment where I saw that the whole market froze, all of these investors, and we're talking about not just sort of individuals, but we're also talking about, pension funds that have to pay people who have worked very hard and earned this money. So they have real responsibility to their investors. And so I was seeing this frozen investor base that really needed to think about how to invest their money smartly. And I could see that the world had changed. Everyone had to sort of rethink what they were doing. And so what I ended up getting to sort of play an essential role in and do this with sort of one of the partners I worked with was launching a fund that had a totally new approach to how you manage risk. And that may not sound all that sexy on the surface, but it was a really
important.
it was a really cool thing to experience, completely undoing all these assumptions that we had made historically, taking a totally new lens on what mattered to our investors and the way that the markets might move again and what it meant to try to stay ahead on behalf of these customers. And so in a way, it was this combination of being able to extract real value from data, being thoughtful about what we could do creatively with that information, and then really helping our customers stay ahead of a changing market. That was really the trifecta for me of realizing I loved kind of thinking about building new things. And so in a way, I got to be like a little bit of a product manager when I was still in finance.
And so very much a problem solver. I feel like people that gravitate towards this field are naturally always looking for the issues to solve. How can we change this? How can we do it better? Where's the issue? Let's fix it. And that's it sounds like definitely your approach. I like to also think about when you're doing your workflows. I'm kind of switching gears here. Is there anything that you do to leverage AI in your current workflows as a product manager?
Well, it is interesting you should ask that because I was actually thinking recently that there are ways that AI shows up everywhere. So first of all, what is AI even? We think of artificial intelligence. It's really just trying to say, let's get computers to act as similarly to humans as we can. And so that's not a new field. That's actually like 50 years old. But we're at an inflection point where it's gotten really good in the last year in a way that we really hadn't been able to access before the last year. And I was thinking that like AI in a way shows up for me when I like sign on to Google Meet and I wait a little while and no one's on and it says, do you want to stay here? In a way, that's AI, right? If someone were sitting next to me, they might be like, hey, no one showed up. Should you be on this still? Or when Netflix is reminding me that I'm binge watching a show and maybe I'm just not intentionally watching it. It's like those things that like a person next to you might say. So AI shows up in our lives everywhere. We don't even think about it.
So true.
What I actually get at work as a sort of product leader in the organization is I get to be an early customer of Tableau Pulse. And that is actually how AI has started to show up in my actual flow of work. It really hadn't before. And it was in a way a real miss because it was like, I know the power of this, but I'm not really taking in the benefit of it. And now because I again get to be kind of like customer zero of my team's products, I get the information that matters to me and the insights generated in natural language, and they show up in my inbox or my Slack regularly. And it's already a game changer for me. I mean, what's fun about this whole product, honestly, is everyone who's working on it can relate to the problem. We all wish we had the information that might impact our day-to-day decisions right there when we need them. So that's kind of how it shows up for me today.
Well, that's so exciting to hear. It is so fresh and new. And the fact that you're using your own product speaks for itself. And it's kind of nice to get the inside scoop, as these tools are being rolled out and used more widely. I don't think many people have had a chance to kind of hear it from your perspective, which is awesome. Just thinking about the future, knowing that you are an inventor, a lead of product management, very high up at a very large organization. Where do you see the trends going in AI influencing the evolution of data, the future of AI in these sorts of use cases, maybe even the use of synthetic data? Any of those topics resonate with you that you can share some insights on?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that really come to mind for me when I think about kind of where are things going, where are things how are things shifting? One of them is there is really no industry and no function that will be untouched by this when we look back in just 5 years, I think. It'll be quick. 5 years is quick, I think, by historical standards for these things to shift. So what that means is we're in this moment where everyone's feeling a certain amount of pressure to figure out, like, what does this mean for me? How can this improve my business or improve my efficiency, right? We're in an era of trying to do more with less. The economy feels uncomfortable for a lot of businesses still, and I think it will remain that way for a while. So we have this moment where everyone is sort of, I think, in a bit of a shuffle to figure out what's the right way to take advantage of this. And at the same time, as amazing and as much as I love AI, it doesn't work if it just goes unchecked. And so I actually think what's going to be really revolutionary next is if we take what is incredibly impactful and powerful technology and techniques that we now have, and then figure out the right way to have humans in the loop. I mean, we know, for example, that if a bank tries to give out home loans based purely on a model, it'll incorporate the same human biases we've seen humans have, right? That's kind of exactly the challenge. So getting really smart about where and when it's impactful, and where and when to hold back, or to check the model, or to check what you're getting from the data or the AI is going to be the really powerful combination. And I think we're a little bit of a barbell moment where there's either exuberance or fear. And I think we're going to find a really healthy in-between state across a lot of industries over the next 5 to 10 years.
Oh, it's so exciting. I'm definitely an AI optimist. I like to think of, all the potentials and how we can get this right. And I think that's a really positive note for the people who are nervous about what's going to happen to their jobs. I think that definitely creates an opportunity for new roles and new professionals that can get into the field. And I'm really excited to see it.
I totally agree with you. And I actually think for data analysts, it's like such an opportune moment, because the people who have grappled with data for years and who think this way already are going to be really well poised to have thoughtful insights on what the right way to take advantage of AI will be. So it becomes a really, really valuable skill set to have that background and have that experience. And it will be very influential, I think, on how we actually employ this kind of technology.
Certainly. Yeah. I can't wait to see it happen. Great. I would just like to know, we kind of touched on this earlier, but specifically with your leadership skills that you've developed, and being able to command teams of product managers. For the women who are looking to follow a similar path, you've definitely given us a lot of great nuggets already. Is there anything you'd like to leave, like imparting wisdom with them on leadership specifically?
On leadership, I think there's 2 things that are really important that I would want to leave people with. One is, when you're leading a team, it's so important to be in the frame of mind that your job is to make your team and each of the individuals successful. Because what turns out to happen is, if you make it clear to them that you are there for their success, they will also be there for your success. You are all there to help each other, and it makes the whole team really effective. It helps create a really high functioning team. The communication becomes more open. The ability to point out problems becomes not personal, because now it's just, hey, we're in this to all succeed. And so I think having that frame of mind is something that I notice gets missed by some leaders. And I think you'll get a lot of loyalty and care from your team if you do that. And by the way, you mentioned earlier this idea of being problem solver. You'll also have everyone trying to solve the problems with you, because we know you cannot do it on your own. So that's kind of the first thing, is like kind of having that frame of mind. And then the second thing is just on the kind of being a woman part. I think one thing that's important, and I will just say for me, I make a point of looking around and trying to lift up the women around me. That is really important to me. And that being said, when I go through my day as a woman sitting in a room, I think it's important not to let it consume you, that you might be the only woman in the room, or that you might be one of very few. I remember once I was in a room with, it was me and 12 men. It was actually one of the guys there was a very good friend of mine. And we went through something, and I asked, does ABC matter? And he specifically said, and it was his expertise, he said, no, ABC doesn't matter. And so I said, okay. And 20 minutes later, he goes, you guys, ABC is going to be really important. And in that moment, I said, hey, I brought up ABC 20 minutes ago, and you said it didn't matter. And after that conversation, I was kicking myself. Why did I even bother to bring that up? I didn't need to call him out on that. And then I realized, but when I say nothing, which was kind of my default, I also kick myself. And so I think that the reason I share that is just to say, yeah, it's definitely tricky at moments. I don't want to belittle the experience. I have my own challenges with it. But the reality is, if you obsess about it, if you make it a huge part of your consciousness day to day, it will really interrupt your ability to just master what's in front of you and lead your team really well. And those are the things that will make you successful. So that's my sort of, maybe the sort of reality check I give myself that I'll share with other folks as well. But yeah, that's it.
That's incredibly helpful. Yeah, I think that's relatable for a lot of women that find themselves in those positions. And I think that's great advice. I mean, I've learned so much just with talking to you already. I feel like the insights are many, and I really appreciate your time. So thinking back to your career, just noticing that you've had some time in this field and you've spanned the government sector, the private sector, and you've worked in quantitative fields. How have you seen the change in how data-driven decision making was happening in those fields? How did that evolve, in your experience? And is there a similarity you can draw to what's happening today with that evolution?
Yeah, that is interesting. It has been really kind of a journey. I mean, so when I started on Wall Street, I was doing quant investing, as I mentioned, and that was kind of nichey at the time. So if you ask someone in finance or asset management today, quant is kind of a default one of the categories. But at the time, it was still kind of like a nichey thing, and that might make it sound cool, but it was also kind of the nerdy thing. So it depends on how you look
Which
at
is
it.
still cool. Yes.
It was cool for me. I felt like I'd found my people to be in that space. And what was interesting is, in a way, finance as an industry was always very data driven, I think, on a relative basis. It had the right sort of, I guess, dynamics to be focused on data kind of early. But another thing I often say is, just 20 years ago, it was totally a competitive advantage just to have some data and analyze it. And what I noticed today, and this is kind of mirrors the experience with sort of that quant investing trajectory, is today the competitive advantage isn't to have data or analyze it, it's actually to take advantage of it. And so kind of going back to that quant thing, like one of the things that was a huge deal just 15 years ago was just cleaning a data set that no one else bothered to clean and then trading on it. That was an incredibly valuable thing to do, even if it meant that a researcher might spend 9 days out of 10 just cleaning data.
Wow.
And so you can imagine how that's evolved. And what's interesting is that sort of world of going from it being kind of an extra to it being a default to do this quant investing process. That's really what I'm seeing across industries today. We're going through this pivot of, it would be awfully nice to have data to prove these things, to we can't do it without the data. And what I always find interesting is, every executive I talk to tells me, I wake up in the morning worried about, I don't know, selling more treadmills, or, serving more customers, or, having more engineering output. They worry about these substantive outcomes, but they'll also tell you, I do not wake up in the morning thinking about data. That was true, 10 years ago, but the shift to today is that the next thing they say is, but I have to have data to drive all of those things. And that's that meaningful pivot that I'm seeing going on in the world. And it comes from, everything from earnings calls, right? Shareholders expect to see data, CEOs want data, boardrooms, and then every manager and every one-on-one wants the data about how that person on their team is performing and what is going well and where can they help them. So it's a kind of an incredible evolution. I do think, in a way, having started in a place where there was a lot of value put on this data-driven approach, but it's still being a little bit nichey. I mean, maybe I'm overstating how nichey, but still being like a little bit of a smaller thing, and seeing that evolve is really an interesting mirror to how we're evolving, I think, across all these industries today.
Oh yeah, certainly. So what I gather from that is that the general population is demanding these tools now. It's actually starting to become something that most people are becoming savvy about, and they're actually looking for these tools to be made. It's not like, the other way. It seems to me like you're meeting a demand almost. Is that kind of something that you've seen when you were, going through the process of, product market fit and things like that?
Yeah. And I love that you're bringing up product market fit. I mean, that is like the holy grail for every product person. Like, does this meet a demand? I mean, if you ask someone on my team, the number of times I talk about what is the actual pain of the user that we're trying to improve, that's how you have to start. And because we started with the idea that the business people that we're trying to serve and we're trying to help data analysts serve are really people who aren't spending their day in data, aren't trying to go necessarily find the data, know how to do their jobs well already, but want to do them better with data. That understanding and empathizing with that user has proven to be really valuable in how we've shaped the product. And we're getting the feedback that that's really what it's doing for people, is it's changing their ability to make decisions on the fly. It's making, I mean, I heard one CEO say, if I could just get everyone to make 1% better decisions across my tens of thousands person company, I'm not trying to keep it a little anonymous, the increase in value I would create, the value that I would create would be unbelievable. And that's what we're really trying to help people do, is just increase their ability to do things a little bit more effectively, a little bit more efficiently every single day. And so again, it kind of starts with that. To find that product market fit starts with really understanding who that end user is and being empathetic to that person's day. And we are seeing that.
That's fantastic. Just thinking again, towards the future of where analytics roles are going. Speaking about the new opportunities are kind of coming up, as far as managing the AI, and making sure we're limiting the biases and working in human manual intervention in a meaningful way. Do you have any ideas about what these new roles might look like and what they might be called for people that are kind of looking to evolve in their career?
I think for the names of the roles, we've got to go to like a good marketer or something.
Right.
Naming has never been my expertise.
Are you hearing any buzz? Is there something that you might be privy to?
The buzz I'm hearing a lot of is what I call kind of a translation role. I was recently talking to a professor at Harvard Business School who works in AI, and he was saying, he sees the importance of a translation role coming up at every company he talks to. And I think that is overlapping with and adjacent to this idea of sort of ethics focus as well. It's someone who sort of understands the impact of the AI that's coming out.
So kind of bringing this all together, everything we spoke about, I just want to hear what Salesforce and you particularly are thinking about when you are trying to bring the mass population into user adoption and you're trying to ease those fears of leveraging these tools. What are some things that Salesforce and you personally might have thought of, that help people kind of feel comfortable adapting?
Yeah. So for businesses to take advantage of this, trust is paramount. That's just the first thing we have to worry about. And so Salesforce is actually creating this really amazing centralized way to access generative AI with a trust layer specifically for Einstein. And so what's so exciting for me is, as part of Tableau and analytics for Salesforce, we get to leverage all of that. And there's an entire thing, I will stop myself from launching into the details, but there's something we call the secure gateway that makes sure that no data is ever saved anywhere outside of our walls, that everything is totally safe and trustworthy. And we ensure there's no hallucinations, and we ensure that PII is stripped of anything that leaves the Salesforce ecosystem for any reason, but nothing is saved outside of our walls. And that is so valuable, because without that, I would not want to risk suggesting we use any sort of LLMs with any customers. And so it gives me the confidence that we can use it, and it gives our customers the confidence we can use it. So the Salesforce vision is really about doing incredibly powerful work, always with trust as our first tenet.
Fantastic. I feel like there's so much great information today for new and existing analysts that are looking to know what's happening in the field and, feeling more comfortable leveraging these tools. It was really, really amazing to be able to dive into your mind a little bit and kind of impart this wisdom with our listeners. Is there anything else that you'd like to mention to our listeners that might be thinking about becoming an analyst? Is there anything else to mention?
My main message is go for it. I think that it's be an incredibly valuable skill set immediately and in the very long term. And I don't think there's anything that should cause someone to shy away if they have any interest. And just a reminder that you get to be creative in the analytics space too. People don't talk about that often. But those are my two things. Go for it, and don't hesitate to think outside the box when you're doing it too.
So if you have any fears or reservations about the field, I think now is the time to put those fears aside and get involved. It's never been easier, and the creative potential is limitless. So this is all fascinating. Well, thank you so much for your time again. And I just wanted to ask really quick for the listeners following along that have really taken away a lot of insight from this discussion. Is there a social media or a platform that you would prefer that they can follow you along at?
Oh yeah, I'd absolutely love to hear from people. My LinkedIn is the easiest way to find me. Definitely reach out or get in touch on LinkedIn. You can just look me up at Caroline Sherman, and it'll be easy to find.
Oh, that's so wonderful. Thank you so much for offering that.
Thank both of you at WWCode. I really appreciate your being very patient with me through this. Thank you.
Likewise.
Take care. I'll talk to you soon.